Okay, welcome everyone to our AAF Lunch and Learn today. Our topic is compliance versus commitment, how to go beyond accessibility with advertising and disability. And we have co-hosts today, Mallory Crooks with the Ability Center of Greater Toledo and Josh Loebner of Design Sensory. I'm the moderator. I'm just going to cover some quick logistics, and then I will turn it over to Mallory and Josh. Again, my name is Sue Bruning. I am on the board of AAF Toledo and chair of the programs committee. So excited that we've been able to continue our Lunch and Learn series during COVID and bring these Zoom sessions to you. A couple logistics today. We are excited to have closed captioning courtesy of the Ability Center today. You can use your chat box to submit questions or comments at any time, and then we'll open things up at the end of the broadcast for discussion and Q&A. And our session is being recorded today and will be hosted on the AAF Toledo website. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mallory, a longtime AAF Toledo member, and a huge thank you, Mallory, for arranging our topic today.
Well, thanks for having us. So as she said, my name is Mallory Crooks. I'm actually a former AAF board member and the public relations manager at the Ability Center. And for those who don't know what the Ability Center is, we're a local nonprofit serving people with disabilities. We actually just celebrated our 100th anniversary as an agency. So as part of that celebration, we asked what would it take to be the most disability-friendly community in the country. So that conversation was really fueled by local leaders in the community, other nonprofits and businesses throughout many different industries. So as part of that conversation, we thought that bringing an expert to speak on disability inclusion within the ad agency community would be a great opportunity. That's where Josh comes in. So we hope that Josh's knowledge and expertise really spark some creative conversation within membership and more considerations for people with disabilities as you build your own communications campaigns. So a little bit about Josh. He is the director of strategy at Design Sensory in Knoxville, Tennessee. He's a disability advocate living with a visual impairment. He's a national consultant and speaker touring the country speaking about disability representation in marketing, advertising. He's worked on many national brands, including the U.S. Army, Crystal Light, Advil, and Monsanto, to name a few. He is earning his PhD from Clemson University, and his focus is on advertising and disability. He has also been a lecturer at the University of Tennessee and King University. He is an inductee into the AAF Knoxville Chapter Hall of Fame, served as the diversity chair for AAF District 7, and is the recipient of the AAF Silver Medal. Josh is also a contributor to Adweek. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg. So I'll let him take it away and he can go from there. Josh?
Hey, thanks so much, Mallory. And just to confirm, can everybody see my screen? It says Crip Theory and Creative Briefs.
We can't see it, but it's the PDF view. So we're also seeing your toolbar on the side.
Oh, that's funny. I see it on full screen on mine. So you might see the toolbar if that's okay. I'm not sure how to change that, but I'm going to plug along if that works.
I think on my end, I can only see half of the presentation.
Oh, that's so weird. Let me stop screen sharing. And let's see. Bear with me. Let's see, I'm going to, for whatever reason.
There you go.
That's better.
When I go to full screen, it's kind of odd, but anyway, let's just go this way and hopefully we can all get through it and it makes sense. So just a little bit about me. Thank you so much, Mallory. Just a little bit more. I'm appreciative to be able to be here today. A bit more about my background and my disability. I am blind, fully blind in my left eye, legally blind in my right eye, and I was born with a disability. There's a blurry kind of screenshot of my birth certificate. When I was born, the doctors said to not name me, and my parents said to heck with that. I was born 3 months premature. I only weighed 2.5 pounds, and this was many years ago. And my parents gave me the strongest name they could, Joshua Bernard Zachary Lobner. And so that's stuck with me. And I've been in advertising for about 20 years and really enjoy the American Advertising Federation. I serve nationally with the AAF on the Mosaic Council. The Mosaic Council and the Mosaic Center are some of the premier industry teams and initiatives and think tank to really be able to power diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm glad to be able to share a voice on disability within that group. And yeah, I'm earning a PhD right now. I'm about to complete it, which I'm super excited about. But I really enjoy, most of all, speaking with different professionals in the industry and students as well who are interested in coming into the industry, because hopefully through these conversations, we can make some changes. I also host a podcast. I started the Explorable Podcast about this time last year, and it focuses on travel and accessibility and disability inclusion. And my co-host is another blind gentleman with the Expedia Group. So we talk to different brands all across the country, from Disney to Alaska Airlines to airports, to hear about disability inclusion there in the travel tourism standpoint. Beyond my Mosaic role within the AAF, I also serve on the Adweek DEI Council, and there are a lot of big brands that are committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so the thing that I would share with everybody is that this is really not on the periphery anymore. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is a central component to many brands and agencies' initiatives. So even if you feel like some of your clients don't directly connect to diversity, equity, and inclusion topic or disability as well, I would love to be able to have more of a deeper conversation, and hopefully we can today, that kind of brings how that can come about. And of course, we know that George Floyd and everything tragic that had happened, it's still in the news, and it's going to continue to stay within kind of the conversation. And that's a good thing from a branding standpoint, to be able to pivot and to change. The thing to consider is that brands have really dove in, and this past summer almost had knee-jerk reactions to making changes, whether it's the name and iconography of a syrup brand, right? Aunt Jemima changing its name, NASCAR eliminating Confederate flags at races, the Redskins changing their name. Of course, in Ohio, the Cleveland Indians looking to change their name. And I know there's a lot of heritage and connection to some of this, but there's also dynamic change. And so the question to ask is, how does disability fit into all of that? And I do want to say, Mallory, if you want to dive in any of these points, you're welcome to. I really do appreciate the initiative for Toledo to be one of the most disability-friendly cities. That is a phenomenal opportunity for the community to come together, and that's what it's going to take. Everybody in marketing, advertising, communications is very powerful, and communications, I would argue, is one of the key components of really bringing about change. When it comes to the disability community, it's wonderful to hear that your organization has been in the community for 100 years. And disability is always around us, but oftentimes it doesn't seem that way. Disability is significant. Millions upon millions of people in the US have a disability. So again, from a communication standpoint, we need to recognize that this really isn't a small niche, but it's a huge part of our population. And it is open 24/7. If we think about the various and different minorities, disability is considered a minority group. And any one of us, whether we're born with a disability or we age into it, it really starts to, when you think about it, impact all of us. And so from a copywriter perspective, from a designer perspective, from a programmer perspective, or just an account management perspective, any consideration within our industry from a professional standpoint, we can all and should be able to connect with disability. So 1 in 4 Americans has a disability, but broadly in media and entertainment, we don't really see that. We don't see that representation. We're starting to see more, but it could continue to grow. And this is one thing I'd love to share. As somebody who's proud to be part of the AAF and having a 20-year career in advertising. Advertising is super powerful. I would argue that it's the most powerful industry when we look at all the other media industries. Without advertising, we wouldn't be able to promote movies. Without advertising, we wouldn't be able to promote the AAF, right? Even events like this. So advertising helps to power all other communications and fund it as well from a dollar standpoint. And so when we think about that, when we think about advertising being powerful, it helps to shape realities. But what is that reality? Are we welcoming diversity, equity, and inclusion in that reality? Or is it kind of an antiquated, misconstrued perception of reality that just shows, for example, all white people or all people who are abled as opposed to disabled? So just a couple of points to kind of share some of the reasoning about disability and why it might not be seen as much. This is a book cover called The Ugly Laws, where the author writes about in the past that all across America, cities had rules and regulations that said, hey, if you have a disability and we see you out in public as a police officer or a community official, we can find that person. And so people with disabilities started to be institutionalized or put in, back rooms of houses or basements. And while institutionalization has to an extent gradually and significantly now decreased since the 1960s, it's still kind of an othering for people, which is definitely a challenge. I really hate to bring up this slide, but this is a poster, the yellow poster from World War II Nazi Germany, suggesting that people with disabilities cost too much for society to be able to pay for them. And the poster asks in German, do you really want to pay out of your hard-earned dollars to be able to support people with disabilities? And that led to the Holocaust. People with disabilities were some of the first people that were euthanized by Nazi Germany as an initial attempt to validate elimination of marginalized groups of people across Europe. And yet, the ghosts of the past creeped up. I hate to say it, I'm a Tennessean, and this was in my home state, a woman protesting at the onset of the lockdowns last summer saying to sacrifice the weak. And she was not the only person to be able to have that opinion. So there's still societally an othering and a marginalization to an extent of people with disability, where advertising can play a wonderful role to be able to welcome people with disability in a very powerful way, and an intentional way and authentically. I do want to share this as well. Oftentimes people with disabilities, because they speak differently, because they look differently, they're seen as maybe passive, or because we have othered people with disability from an institutionalization standpoint or in other capacities, we don't see people with disabilities often as wanting to fight for their rights. But the largest and longest occupation of a federal building was in 1977 in San Francisco, huge protest, because people with disabilities wanted to champion their rights for accessibility. So we, of course, have seen all of the Black Lives Matter protests and the energy that can bring. People with disabilities also have that same energy. But as a writer for Adweek, I definitely saw initially at the onset of COVID, very few brands, if any, were welcoming disability into the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation, which was very startling because COVID-19 in and of itself, the virus, the health protocols that were put in place were to be able to afford people who were immunocompromised opportunities to be able to thrive in their household and in their own environments by social distancing. But brands, for whatever reason, didn't recognize the disability community within their marketing and advertising. So this year we had a great celebration. It was the celebration of the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. But I think we all know, looking at other similar acts, the Civil Rights Act of the 1960s, we know that there is still an ongoing journey when it comes to welcoming other minority groups societally and even into communications. Advertising in particular, from an industry level, major agencies recognize their lagging when it comes to hiring of people of color and women and moving them up in the C-suite. So yes, it's wonderful to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, but there's opportunities to move forward. But this isn't all negative. Advertising has come a long way. We've seen major brands do wonderful things when it comes to celebrating and welcoming disability. And look, everybody attending here from AAF Toledo, you don't have to be a brand focused on disability to welcome disability, although if you are, that's wonderful. But you can be a candy bar brand like Maltesers and have authentic inclusion of people with disabilities, or an underwear brand, or a fast food brand like Chick-fil-A, or a technology brand like Microsoft. So, or a clothing brand like Tommy Hilfiger, et cetera, et cetera. So whomever you are representing, if you're at an agency and you have a roster of clients, or if you're an advertiser and you're a major brand in the Toledo area, there are many wonderful ways where you can authentically welcome disability into your communications. Just a consideration, though, from a creative standpoint, there's this pendulum of connectivity or disconnects of how people with disabilities could be portrayed. And we really want the middle of the pendulum swing when it falls vertically. That, from my perspective, is just simply inclusion, to show people with disabilities in a welcoming and authentic way with other people who are able, and other minorities. But sometimes creative can skew one way or the other on that pendulum swing, which is what we don't want. We don't want to be seen as pitiful. We don't want you to throw your hands up and say, well, I can't do anything, so I'm just not going to include people with disabilities. And it really, it's some simple approaches to be able to move forward. Oftentimes, the same approaches as to how you would welcome other minorities could be taken to welcome people with disabilities. These next few slides walk through some language considerations. More often than not, people with disabilities don't want to be called handicapped. That, to an extent, is a bit of an anachronism. I'm proud to be disabled. I'm disabled 365 days out of the year. Now, I do want to say disability is something that could be chronic, in that someone has a disability their entire life and it doesn't change. There could be other opportunities for disability to potentially be temporary, where somebody has a broken arm. And disability could also, to an extent, be considered environmental. For example, if you're out in a very bright, sunny space and you're looking at your mobile phone, you cannot physically see a website if there are certain color issues with it. So disability is something, though, as a word, though, that the disability community is proud of. And I think, though, the word proud is pretty important. We can think of Pride Month when it comes to celebrating queer culture and the LGBTQ plus community. That's a wonderful word, pride. If you just say pride, more often than not, you think of that community. Disappointingly, though, when somebody says disability, it's still a bit of a word where people do lean towards negatives. And so many people in the disability community don't believe that I'm wake up happy every day. I am okay with being blind, and that's a good thing. And my kids and my wife and my colleagues and coworkers and people I interact with hopefully see that as well. There's a medical model of disability and there's a social model, but that could be said for any minority. We don't just think of people of color simply by the pigment of their skin, the melatonin that they have. That would strictly be a medical model. Or women versus men, the biological differences. There's a cultural connectivity when it comes to celebrating womanhood, feminism, and women. There's a cultural connectivity, both positive and negative, when it comes to celebrating Black history, not only where people of color have been in America, but hopefully where people of color can strive and achieve moving forward. And the same is true for disability. So yes, there is a medical model. Yes, accessibility is something that we need to be able to welcome people with disabilities in advertising, but we should and hopefully can move beyond that to authentically represent a cultural consideration of people with disabilities. We never want to be a prop, right? We don't want to be one-dimensional. but rather there's an intersectionality. And intersectionality simply is a layering of environmental, social, and minority considerations. And those can be positive, but oftentimes based on societal norms, they can be negative. But we should celebrate and welcome intersectionality. So in the past in advertising, when it came to incorporating people with disabilities, there's a term called whitewashing, where brands didn't want to show a double minority. They would often show a white person, in fact, a white child with a disability, to lean in towards that pity factor. But brands have done a great job recently to welcome intersectionality. For example, this image here is from a Honey Maid commercial that shows a Black man who's an Army veteran, and he's a double leg amputee. So there it shows multiple minorities. Ableism is when people who are abled look down on people with disabilities. And really, we just want equity. We want to be seen from an equitable standpoint, that people with disabilities can be directors of strategy at advertising agencies, or producers, or creatives, or consumers, right? That we have a buying power as well, and are able to hopefully afford your products and be brand loyal or not brand loyal, depending on your connectivity to advertising with people with disabilities. So inspiration porn is something that may be a new term, but inspiration porn really is just a vacant recognition of people with disabilities. It's when somebody who's abled, for example, sees a social media post that shows a person with autism playing a piano. And there are so many people who post on that and comment on that social media post and say, wow, this is so inspiring. But it's a vacant inspiration. It's an inspiration that doesn't really lead to any action. Whereas allyship is people who are able to supporting people with disabilities. So it's other people in my agency recognizing me for the role that I play, but also as a blind person, and to be able to support not only my needs from a technological standpoint, but also my critical thinking as a partner in projects that we work on to be able to support the disability community. Infantilism is definitely something where people who are abled may often ask people with disabilities if they need help, when that person with a disability doesn't ask for the help. And it may also be where somebody is in a wheelchair and they're seen as childlike, even though they may be an adult. And a little person, maybe who is an adult who has a doctorate degree, maybe they get spoken to as if they are a child, when in fact that's not the case. And advertising has done a great job to showcase the adult side of disability in certain instances, to show that certain people with disabilities enjoy a nice cold frosty beer just like anybody else, or that they have adult relationships. So those are things to consider when it comes to welcoming disability. Supercrit versus social normalization. We've got the Paralympics coming up, and the Paralympians are amazing, but that shouldn't be the only reason to welcome disability to a campaign. If you're a major brand and you want to advertise in the Paralympics, that's great. But what are some other opportunities where you can welcome people with disabilities at any time throughout the year? And so that's where social normalization comes in, that, what is normal, right? I am literally missing an eye. That's a glass eye that I have, that, but that doesn't mean that I am less than normal, right? Disability, as we saw by those numbers, there are millions of people that have disabilities. And Toledo, for wanting to be the most disability-friendly community, doesn't make your community abnormal. Actually, it just shows the normalization of how you all believe disability should be represented, which is just truly wonderful. So everybody should be disability-friendly. Disability-friendly is saying, you know what? We welcome people with disabilities as a brand, as an organization. So disability-friendly is a good thing. But there are opportunities to build on what friendly means, especially if you're a restaurant, or if you represent a restaurant brand, or a hotelier, or a taxi or rideshare company. What can you do to be very factual, and to not only simply say, for example, if you're a hotel, that you have an accessible room, but really unpack what those facts are, that you, for example, might have a wide enough door for people in wheelchairs to be able to come through, that you have an accessible bathroom, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a consideration where, yes, everybody should be disability friendly, and being disability friendly shows that your brand understands and connects with the disability community, which is an amazing thing. But also, what are some steps that could be taken for certain brands to be as factual as possible, so that that person with a disability doesn't have an expectation, and then once they come to a physical establishment, they're disappointed because they can't, for example, even go into the front door. So this is pretty self-explanatory. We are not second class, but we're citizens. This is a screenshot from a commercial that was commissioned earlier that showed how to sign for Black Lives Matter using ASL. So everybody is a citizen, regardless of whether they can speak from their mouth, or they use sign language, or they use neither of those, and they use some other type of platform to be able to communicate. That's the most amazing thing that I would suggest about advertising, is that our industry is full of iconoclasts, and so many people with disabilities are iconoclasts as well, and they potentially may seem different, but consider all the other minority groups that you've connected with and that now you feel comfortable with, and people with disabilities hopefully should be that same way. So this is a bit of a no-no from a branding perspective. It's virtue signaling. Virtue signaling is not what we want, but rather just the opposite. Virtue signaling is when a brand, let's say during Pride Month to celebrate the queer community, wants to welcome them. And the only thing that brand would do is to create a rainbow overlay for their social media posts. They do nothing else. It would be a very thin veneer of welcoming that minority group. They don't do anything to suggest that they're looking to hire more people from that minority group. They don't adjust or change their products to welcome that minority group. They don't do any primary research to be able to show that they have insights for that audience. You don't want to do that. You want to take a much deeper end-to-end opportunity to welcome all minorities. So virtue signaling is not what we want, but rather much more rigorous and planned approach to disability inclusion, or broadly diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's my focus of not only my dissertation, but also my role at the agency I work with, and also within the Mosaic Council at AAF National, is what are some ways that everyone listening can be able to action and operationalize on DE&I and disability inclusion. And so oftentimes in the past, disability has kind of been an afterthought. It's been bolted on, and it's been seen as a very subjective interpretation of disability representation after the fact, once a commercial has been created. But I would suggest, let's look at broadly DE&I and disability inclusion at the beginning of the process when it comes to selecting a creative team. If there's just a bunch of white people, right, in your creative team, and you want to connect with any minority, you would recognize that you need to listen to other people, whether it's through bringing other people in the Toledo community up to the table virtually, right, through a platform such as this, or through focus groups, or through surveys, or through internships, or through hiring a minority. Start with your creative team, and then move into your creative brief. How does your creative brief answer questions when it comes to broadly minority representation from a creative standpoint, from an ideation standpoint, but more specifically from my focus, to welcome people with disabilities? Are you authentically starting off on asking those questions and also answering them in a way that, as you move into production, again, hopefully we're not just props, that you're authentically bringing in talent with disabilities, or if you don't have the budget for talent, stock photography that authentically represents disability inclusion, and that your copywriters and your entire team puts together a campaign that is inclusive, but also accessible, so that in the end, people with disabilities who are blind can be able to connect through, for example, audio descriptions for a video campaign, or for somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing, that there is captioning within videos, that websites are accessible, that your social media campaigns are inclusive and accessible too. It's really thinking about the omni-channel approach to marketing and advertising. You want to make sure that a consumer, as they're going down that marketing funnel, goes from awareness all the way to conversion and loyalty. Well, you want to make sure all of those touch points down that funnel, all the way to them being ambassadors for your brand, is inclusive, is equitable, and is accessible. And I would say as well, this extends well beyond this professional conversation back to the student level. What are we doing as a community, right, to welcome young people who are still at high school to move into college careers and educational opportunities, either broadly as minorities or, again, as students with disabilities, to be able to move into this amazing profession that we're all a part of, advertising. And so these conversations, I love talking to other AAF chapters, but I also see value in connecting with students, and would suggest the same for everybody listening as well. What are some opportunities that you can do to connect at the student level to encourage those people who are on the periphery, who might never think about advertising, to consider it as a wonderful career? I like to reframe acronyms. I really am not a fan of jumbled up alphabetized acronyms that don't make any sense. DE&I has kind of sort of been that way. What does DE&I mean? In some industry categories, it's EDI. And so it could be a little confusing, and it seems like it's something that's not related to maybe the creative team or the media team. So I've rephrased it into this acronym of IDEAS, which stands for Inclusive, Diverse, Equitable, Accessible Successes. And these are disability ideas, but they could be Black ideas, they could be Latinx ideas, they could be any minorities' ideas. They could be anyone's ideas at any time. Any idea that you have for your client, or if you're a brand, any idea that you have as a marketer needs to be inclusive. It needs to be diverse. It needs to be equitable. It should be accessible. And all of those lead to successes. If you're not doing any one of those for any campaign, then you're missing out on your customers. And so hopefully from that, you should see that there could be ways throughout the process that you can welcome people with disabilities. And I'll leave this with you guys. Accessibility is being able to get into a building. Diversity is getting invited to the table. Inclusion is having a voice at the table, but really we want belonging. Belonging is having your voice heard at the table. So for those consumers that are maybe marginalized and on the periphery, they want to belong to a brand just as much as anyone else, and the disability community does. So I'm going to just leave it at that, and hopefully we have some time for questions.
I don't see any questions yet in the chat box, but if there are, feel free to leave them there. So I do have one. Josh, I know that you talked about the authenticity of stock images and B-roll. So I would ask you tangibly, for everyone on the call, how would you advise agencies to think through that with their clients? So if they're just thinking they need a token person with a disability in their campaign, how do they open up that conversation in a really authentic way?
You know, that's where research can be pretty powerful. If you already are listening to your consumers, whether it's simply the comments that people are sharing on the social media channels for the brand that you're representing, or if you have more robust platforms of listening to the consumers that are important to you through surveys, through focus groups, through one-on-one interviews, what are you hearing from them? And then how can you reinterpret that if you are connecting with consumers that have disabilities, or if you're not, how can you incorporate them into your research so that you're starting to bubble up and find out ways that they interact with your brand, that they use your brand, that they may have questions about your brand? That helps to start a foundation for really transitioning if you have an upcoming photo shoot once the pandemic subsides, or if you're creating photo shoots and video shoots right now. How can you welcome people with disabilities? It starts with hearing from them first, so that there's a phrase, nothing about us without us. And that can be used for any minority group, but in particular, it's been a kind of a vocal rally cry of people with disabilities where, you know, again, don't just have white people around a table who are able to coming up with ideas, but listen to people with disabilities. But if you want to literally explore things right after this meeting, one of the first places you could go to is Getty Images for stock photography. Getty Images has a section that's dedicated towards authentic representation of people with disabilities, that you could immediately transition into, campaign elements, social media posts that kind of create a bridge, closing a gap towards more welcoming if you do have any upcoming photo shoots.
Great, thank you. You also talked about this as well, but hiring people with disabilities and making sure that they have a seat at the table. So what would you say to the agencies here if they're thinking about hiring with people with disabilities, they want to, they're nervous, they don't know what all accommodations will entail? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Definitely. I mean, I would say, of course, after my answer, to really connect with you, Mallory, and other organizations in your community. So here in Knoxville, I belong to the Mayor's Council on Disability Issues, and I'm sure, along with your organization, Mallory, there are any number of others that have a voice for the disability community. I think oftentimes brands, agencies might really not know where to go when it starts for that process of bringing somebody with a disability on board. And really, it could start with students. Every community as well has colleges and universities that are either in their community or close proximity. And every college and university has either an accessibility student services or disability student services center, where there are hundreds, if not thousands, of students that have disabilities that are ready and willing to be able to find out more about an industry. And so that's where, if you don't, I understand budgets are lean right now when it comes to campaigns, but also when it comes to hiring. But as we approach the summer season right now and opportunities for young people to learn more about the industry, bring on somebody who has a visual disability, or who's deaf or hard of hearing, or who has autism or any other disability, to be able to show them what the industry has to offer them. Additionally, again, look for ways where you could start to bring in people with disabilities who might be consumers to hear their voice, where, again, if you're not really ready, willing, and able to make a commitment to hire somebody, there's so many ways that you can start to see that conversation with the disability community. And I can guarantee, once those conversations start, you're going to start hearing from individuals with disabilities that have marketing degrees, that have backgrounds in branding, marketing, and advertising, that are willing and open to opportunities to be able to work at an agency.
That's great. I will say, just from experience, I think people need a shot. If no one's given them the opportunity to be an intern yet, then they don't know their skill set. So just give people a chance. And I do appreciate the plug for the Ability Center. We do have an advocacy program that does just that. They work with employers. We also partner with local agencies too, to provide education and support. So just thank you for that plug. I do have a question in the chat. This is from Katie. She says, I'm the marketing coordinator at Bittersweet Farms, an organization serving adults with autism. Many of our participants are non-speaking, and I have been working hard to center them and to highlight their experience more and more in our video, not just photo content. I would love to hear your thoughts and ideas for doing this in a fully inclusive way. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. And so what I will say is, I get asked a lot by people on the design and creative teams and video production teams. They're like, how can we be able to showcase people with disabilities that might have invisible disabilities, like those that might be neurodiverse, that have autism? And what I would say is that your brand is more than just a video. Your brand hopefully has a website. Your brand might have behind the scenes footage. So there are opportunities and ways to be able to unpack stories in so many more layers, that it's not just a video. But one thing to share when it comes to autism is social stories. And social stories are ways that vary in plain language and primarily by still images, showcase experiences that people who are neurodiverse, that have autism, and for their families, can easily walk through an experience that they might not be familiar with. There are a number of brands that have done this on their websites, where it allows somebody who has autism or who's neurodiverse to understand in very simplistic terms, plain language terms, what that experience is all about. The Seattle airport has that. Alaska Airlines has an app that shows people this social story. So I think when it comes to neurodiversity and autism, social stories are critical to invite people who are neurodiverse and their families to understand what experiences are prior to kind of moving forward and diving into the experience. That's one thing. But as well, oftentimes people may not want to, because it's so different, show people with disabilities in non-traditional communicative aspects. But what I would argue is that breaks down that barrier of othering to show that person who is nonverbal using potentially feelings or emotions card, which is a flat card that shows different emotions, or different language boards that they may use, or even simply a dry erase board that allows people to interact. Spoken word, of course, is not the only way to communicate. And there are ways that you can capture and show that, and that's okay.
Great. So we have one more question, if there are no other questions in the chat, and then I'll kick it to Sue. But I just wanted to talk through how important is the prep work within the production of the campaigns. So considerations like public transportation to a shoot location, headphones for individuals with sensory needs, captioning. Can you talk through like the very tangible steps on how this can actually come to fruition when people are actually doing the production piece?
Yeah, if you are doing a production, you definitely want to have a checklist in place, and all of those things and others, Mallory, are critical to showcase that you've listened, you're attentive, and you're attuned to the disability community. So, for example, I've heard stories in the past where there are actors with mobility disabilities that are in wheelchairs that go to a shoot and they find out that the studio location or the field location is inaccessible because of even one step, is going to inhibit that wheelchair from easily moving into that location. So there are opportunities for you to be able to, as a brand, ensure that your production is as accessible and inclusive as possible. And so you're kind of scratching your head thinking, well, I don't know all of those things that are going to allow me to make my production accessible. Again, that's where you can talk with the disability community and ask them directly. If you're looking to hire talent that has a disability that's part of a talent agency, speak with that agency directly and those individuals to hear from them. What are some accommodations or accessibility requirements that they have prior to a shoot so that you can plan it as effectively as possible? Whether it's people with autism that want to wear silencing headphones, whether it's ensuring that somebody who's blind is very familiar with the location and that their companion that may be getting them there, if there's not public transit, has information for parking and for attending that experience. But really, I think the most important thing to do before making a checklist is talking to the people who you want to be in the production to ensure that they can give you and voice their opinion as to what's important for them.
That's great. Well, I think that's a wrap on questions. So I just personally want to thank you, Josh, for doing this for us. This is great for the Ability Center in order to put our mission on the forefront with these creatives and individuals in the community. So this is really helping to put forth our mission too. So Sue, I think that you got some housekeeping notes.
I do. Thank you, Mallory. And again, appreciate you bringing this topic to our attention and asking for the lunch and learn on the topic today. So just a note out there to all of our members, if there's a specific topic related to marketing and advertising that you want to learn more about or that you'd like to present on, please reach out to us. And you can do that through any of our social media channels or through our website. We do have some upcoming events. Our Coffee with Creatives discussion is held on the second Thursday of every month at 9:30 a.m. Our next meeting is on May 13th, and this is going to be a fun one. And most of our Coffee with Creatives are really fun. It's just an informal gathering and discussion. So in May, we'll be talking about sports marketing and social media strategy. And we have a very special guest for that, Amanda Jerzykowski, the social media coordinator for the Toledo Mud Hens and the Walleye. And then we will be taking a break on Lunch and Learn. We've got one more coming up in May on agile creativity. I know I'm going to sign my whole marketing team up for that one. That should be really good. Details are on the website for that. That will be our last one of this membership season. So we'll take a break from June through August and then be back in September with the Lunch and Learns. One last plug for AdBid. So AdBid is now open. It runs April 19th through the 28th. It is an online auction and fundraiser for AAF Toledo. I was poking around yesterday. I've got 3 bids in. I won't tell you what I'm bidding on, but lots of cool features, a ton of really great things, local adventures, professional marketing experiences. So take a look. And all of our events are on the website, aaftoledo.org. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mallory. Thank you, Josh. It was an excellent presentation.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
to our interpreter as well.
Yes, thank you, Terry.
Have a great day.